There's no reason to put everybody up. All right, so I'll read the executive order on remote participation. On Wednesday, March 29th, 2023, Governor Healy signed into law Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, an act making appropriations for fiscal year 2023, which includes a 2-year extension of the option for public bodies to hold remote meetings by suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20. That action was effective immediately, extending to the current option for remote meetings through March 31st, 2025. So we're right under the wire here. Any indication of whether they're going to extend that, John? I would imagine they are. They're going to make it
I'm
permanent.
glad you asked because earlier today, John Wallace was at our meeting, and I know it went late, John, but I gave my update. The update is the legislature is aware of the impending expiration time. There is some interest in it, but we don't have any active understanding of an imminent bill being signed, delivered, or anything like that. If history follows, they will wait until the last minute for something or anything to emerge. Bill Buckley just reminded me the last time this went down for an extension, I think there was actually a couple of days where the Commonwealth had no such rule in place. It lapsed, but there are a lot of communities, including the Mass Municipal Association, that are advocating for the continuation of the program. Speaking on behalf of Norfolk County, I can tell you it's been a bonus
Yeah.
way to keep our meetings transparent and open and available to people who can't otherwise make the trip in. So I've alerted the commissioners that they've got about 2 more meetings that will be under the existing executive order. When we hear something, we'll let folks know.
Okay. The last I heard from my sources was that they were looking at making it permanent. That was from a couple of our local senators. I don't know if that's actually why there's
Oh,
it. Well,
it has to now be a general law, Eric.
yeah,
Executive orders, by themselves can no longer stand under the emergency order that the governors previously had
true.
authority to create this rule for. So what they have to do is amend Chapter 30A.
Right. Okay. All right. So I will officially call the meeting to order. We'll do a roll call. So we have Barbara Seal, correct?
Yes.
Paul Connors,
Did you hear me, Eric?
oh, now I can. All right, you're
Okay,
on.
come on.
And myself, the chair, we are waiting for Dr. Child and Mr. Redden. I don't know whether Mr. Redden is joining us or not. So we will get started. So basically, the reason I called the meeting was to just kind of look at the Aggies budget. And Mr. Wallace, I appreciate you being here today with us as well. I know there were a lot of questions last year from the NCAB board, and there was a little bit of contention there on especially on the teacher contract issue. So for full transparency, we figured it would be a good idea for you to meet with the finance committee. Let us hear your presentation on where you think things are. Give us an opportunity to ask any questions prior to the full board meeting. And this way we can be your advocate instead of an adversary, which is what we don't want. We don't want adversarial, we want advocacy. So I'll just I know that everybody got a copy of the budget presentation. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Wallace, you had said that the budget has gone to the commissioners, but it has not been approved by the trustees yet. Is that correct? Is that still correct?
Yeah, it will be 1 week from now. We'll present it, Eric, and hopefully get it approved on the 19th.
So after just so I understand the process, because I know generally in our town, the process would be departments would submit to the Board of Selectmen, let's say in our town. The board then approves it. It's already been approved by the various elected or appointed boards before it hits the executive. Then it would go on to the finance committee and to the town meeting. So it sounds like in this case, it goes to the commissioners first, then it goes to the trustees. And I understand the commissioners are trustees, right?
Yeah, that is the timing. I mean, John has his timing and his levels of approval that he has to, John Cronin has to achieve. And we would want to do as the most accurate budget we can with as much actual information as possible. Obviously, we're a much smaller entity than John is running as a county. So that is the way it has been historically. It doesn't have to be done that way. John is doing a timing that works well for him, and we're trying to do one that works best for us. If anything, we would adjust our timing to try to move our approval process earlier. So far, I'd say it hasn't really been a problem. I mean, obviously, John can weigh in on the timing and how it works or doesn't work for him. But we do kind of like a preview of the budget in February when we get our tuition approved. So we did get our tuition approved in February, and we'll talk about that. And you guys have slides about the tuition for next year, which is, you know, key issue for your towns, cities and towns. So we do give them sort of a preview of the budget. So we do get kind of like high level approval of the concept of the budget, but the details of the budget get presented in our March meeting, always in our March meeting. Actually, the county was kind enough to move our presentation of the budget back a couple of weeks so that we did have a gap between when we presented our tuition request and when we presented our budget to the commissioners. And we do it in draft, and we explain to them, and they understand, because as you say, they are trustees. They understand that our school trustees haven't approved our budget yet that we're presenting, but in order to fit into John's time frame, we need to give him our numbers, and we've uploaded our numbers into the system that John's using to, you know, corral all the elements of the county into something that he can present to his county commissioners.
Okay. Yeah, we have a similar thing on the town as well. The schools historically are never, they don't have all the data by the time we are looking to actually finalize, I guess you'd say, a final draft of the budget. So
I could pull up those things we distributed, or I could just refer to them, whatever you think is going to be most
I don't have a
effective.
problem with you sharing the screen. Bill, is that something you can make happen? Or is it something I have to do?
Yeah, I'll let him screen share. Give me one
Okay.
second.
All right, I see that as an option, Bill. I'm going to click on it.
Click share screen. You should be all set now.
Yep.
There
There
it
you
is.
go.
Okay.
So you guys can see this, the plan principles.
Yes.
Okay, so overview is two important things that are not every year things for the school. One is that we're in negotiations with teachers, which happens every 3 years. And for the first time ever, we're in negotiation with what we call support staff. So for the first time in the 100-year history of the school, we have a non-teacher union, and that is a offshoot of the American Federation of Teachers, so that our teachers have a contract, and then the support staff, which is everybody in the school other than administrators, is in one big separate group, which we call the support staff, and they are also under the AFT, and they are negotiating their first contract, or we are negotiating an initial contract with them. So we have been working for months on a initial contract, because initial contract is very complicated, just determining work hours, determining grades, salaries, all those things that are starting points in a teacher's renegotiation are all on the table for the first time. Whether we have paid vacations, whether we have paid holidays, all of those things are on the table for this first negotiation. So that's one difference. We don't negotiate for teachers every year. Obviously, it's every 3 years. But for the first time, we have a second union that we're negotiating for. So we've got 2 open union negotiations at the same time. So that affects next year's costs, and it's a big uncertainty because we haven't even begun barely our teachers negotiation, and we haven't even gotten numbers, an offer of cost of living from the support group. So that's still, even though it's been going on, there are still some big issues to resolve with the support group, and the teachers have barely started. So we didn't even get a proposal from them. Secondly, you guys may or may not know that our superintendent is retiring. John Martin is retiring. So we will have the uncertainty of a new superintendent. I don't think financially, salary and stuff like that, there's a huge risk to that, to him turning over, but I guess there's a risk that there would be follow-on position changes of either people who are taking this opportunity to leave or internal candidates who might be promoted, which means we have to backfill the internal spot that we just lost. So it's just it's a lot more uncertainty. It's not so much financial, but it will obviously affect the direction of the school, but not probably in FY26. Probably in all subsequent years, there'll be probably the fingerprints of the new superintendent and what he or she is interested in pursuing and how she wants to, the direction she wants to drive the school or steer the school. So before we look at the details of this year, I just want to give you those two overarching things. And anytime, feel free to ask questions. Anybody in the group or on the call can ask questions as I'm going through this. I'll be glad to answer them in real time if you prefer, Eric, however you want to do it.
Okay, we can save. Well, let's go through each slide and then we can address any questions at that particular point, if that's okay.
Sure. So the plan principles, it's mostly a maintenance of effort as far as what the school is or isn't doing. We're undergoing a strategic plan right now. We're almost finished with it. We have another meeting or two. So from that, we think there could be changes, but we're not budgeting changes for FY26 in our programs or our offering. We still want to generate a surplus because we still have capital needs that we have really no great way of financing, but we can get to that eventually and get to capital. We are not making any headcount changes. We're really holding discretionary expenses flat. We're limiting our capital investments to things that have to do with safety or reducing our carbon footprint or reducing our utilities expenses. So we're trying to get some payback for some of our capital stuff. The only two real initiatives are we're going to hire an energy consultant to help us save on fuel expenses and reduce our carbon footprint, which as a government entity in Massachusetts, we're sort of obligated to get started on this because we've made commitments and the state has made commitments on our behalf. And we're actively going to pursue donations to the school for the first time since I've been here, and I'm not aware of any real active fundraising that has ever gone on for the school, but we want to give that a try because we see that as a huge untapped benefit potentially for the school. That, with 100 years of graduates out there, we have never really tried to get consistent contributions. And frankly, the contributions of our alumni association and our foundation are negligible, have been negligible since I've been here. And it's a real opportunity, we think. So we're going to dip our toe in the water with the consultant. So those are the only two real initiatives in this plan. I'll move on to the plan risks, some of which I've already talked about. It's one of them is new though. Tuition revenue, every year we say tuition revenue adversely affected if we have less out-of-county students than in-county students, right? We'll get to this. I think all of you guys understand that we charge a full boat of tuition to out-of-county students, and we do something quite different for in-county cities and towns. So it does make a difference to our bottom line, how many out-of-county and how many in-county students we have. We can revisit that. New for this year is we've introduced a special education per student charge for in-county cities and towns. Now, we have not done that historically. This is the first year we're going to add that special education surcharge. That you'll see again when we get to the tuition page, but it is an item of interest, let's say, for cities and towns. We shared that piece of information when we got our tuition approved, which was 3 weeks ago. So 3 weeks ago, when we got our tuition approved, we sent out a tuition letter like we do immediately after that meeting saying, here's what next year's approved tuition will be. In-county and out-of-county get a letter. Very different letters, but they each get a letter. And in the in-county letter, we said for the first time, we're going to start charging for special education students. If you send us a special education student, there'll be a surcharge to cover the cost of educating. That's in addition to the standard cost. Basically, it's our special education department divided by the number of special education students. So we get a per student special education surcharge, which is allowed by law, has always been available to us, but we have chosen not to charge in-county cities and towns until this year, until the next risk. So the risk is that the transition I've already discussed, and the capital risks are there. They're not going anywhere, right? We have a lot of buildings to maintain. It's not so much property, but I guess there is paving costs and there's lighting costs. So there's a little bit of property, but there's a lot of building costs that are potentially out there for us, both maintenance and improvements or replacements. But right now, we don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of cash sitting around in our reserve. We don't have a lot of a surplus that we're generating on a year-to-year basis because we're trying to keep our tuition costs down in county. So that's what I would consider a risk, particularly if we had some big capital failure that would require us to really use what limited resources we have saved from previous years, which is 2 million some right now. I think we're a little over $2 million when this year started in our reserves. Where we'll be at the end of the year, prior to FY26, and we're still months away from determining that. If we'll add to that $2 million or even use some of it, because we had planned on using some of it this year for capital purposes. So you ready to move on to some numbers, Eric?
Well, let me stop you for 1 second. First of all, welcome, Liz. It's good to see you. Just wanted to acknowledge the fact that we have another member here. As far as the information you've presented so far, I do have a couple of questions. One is on the new contract. So the support staff is going under a separate contract, but still within the teachers' union. Is that the way I understand that?
Yes, that's the way they've chosen to organize as an offshoot of the AFT, of the teachers' union. I suppose this is a way of doing it. It's not the only way, obviously. And when I say the other group, I'm talking about farm forepersons, custodians, maintenance workers, cafeteria workers. So it's a very broad group. Administrative assistants. It's basically everybody in the school that's not a teacher or a senior administrator, somebody who supervises people. So it's a huge group. It's
So
35 people, but it's very broad.
So let me ask you a question then. Last year, the big question that was revolving around the whole budgetary issue was the AFSCME contract, was the non-teachers contracts.
Non-teachers.
That was
Yes.
sorry?
It was non-teachers. There was the non-teachers in the school. Yeah.
Right. Well, that it sounds like that's what you're saying, is that these people are all falling under, they're not falling under AFSCME, they're falling under the teachers union instead. I'm a little confused. I've never heard of that before.
That's news to me. Maybe John Cronin has something to add in his experience, but yeah, these guys
Yeah,
have
if I could, John, let me jump in real quick to clear it up. Eric, your recollection is that last year there was some dialogue about cost of living allowances that the county was tracking through its 3 AFSCME unions.
Correct.
And at the time, the county was similarly looking at workers who were non-unionized at the time at the schools, administrators, as John just described, that were seeking to get reciprocity or the same COLAs that the teachers union had. Okay, so what we were saying at the time, or I think the commissioners were, why are we giving the teachers, COLA to the non-union members of the schools? The school's argument was, well, we've always done that. There was some dialogue about whether or not the percentage value for increased teaching time or additional instructional time that administrative staff would not feel as part of a cost of living allowance. And the comp to that dialogue was the AFSCME contract over on the county side was not getting the same percentage.
Right.
Okay. So as a result, the advisory board elected to suppress the COLAs at the schools to the number that was essentially the AFSCME number on the county side. Now, since then, I understand the individuals that felt rebuffed by that action have now acted on their own to unionize, which is their constitutional right or legal right anyways. And I think that's what John is saying now. They have now begun to unionize and seek benefits on the track of a collective bargaining agreement. Did I capture that right, Mr. Wallace?
Yeah, just timing is a little bit off. I mean, they were actually unionized officially before that vote, but this was 2 years in a row that we gave them a different cost of living than the teacher.
John, just a correction, they may have been unionized, but they were not certified. There was no active collective bargaining going on with that unit. I believe it just acted. They just filed the paperwork, I believe, at the end of 2024. Is that correct?
No, I've been negotiating with them since the fall.
That's what I just said. You said they've been a collective bargaining unit for 2 years.
No, I didn't say that. I said sometime in 24 they became a collective bargaining unit.
I
I've been
misheard you. I
negotiating.
could have sworn it was 2 years.
Yeah,
It's not
that's
a
what I heard
debate
too.
here. I'm just trying to clear up that as a result of procedures and actions that occurred under the development for the FY25 budget, these at the time, non-unionized administrative workers have now, since then, Eric, over the last 6 to 12 months, have begun to unionize and find themselves in a collective bargaining space. It is true that this group had organized maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, but were never certified. They're now certified, and now we're bargaining with them.
Okay,
All right.
Thank you.
okay.
And they've made it clear that they intend to get the same cost of living as the teachers. You know, they have synced up their negotiations with the teachers, and they have made it abundantly clear that they will be asking for the same cost of living as the teachers and expect to be in lockstep with the teachers. I mean,
Well, I wouldn't expect anything less just from my knowledge of contracts in general. I would expect that that's exactly what they'd be looking for, is at least equal to the teachers, if nothing else. So that I don't think that comes as much of a surprise. But any questions revolving around that piece of this from any members?
Eric, I just have a timing piece. John indicated that, they're kind of in the early stages of making progress with this new contract. Is there you know, drop dead date is the wrong term, but is there a date that you're shooting for, let's put it that way, to have a contract?
yeah, we started in the fall, almost at the beginning of the school year of 24. And the original suggestion was that we would give them a contract for just FY25, just this current school year. And then they would be synced up with the teachers who are going to have a new contract beginning the FY26 school year. So that was their original idea. But as this negotiation dragged on and on and on and on and on, and we passed the midpoint of the year, we said to them, we weren't any more open to the idea of doing something retroactive to July 1st of 2024.
Right.
And we suggested a 3-year contract, which would be synced up with the teachers beginning July 1st, 2025.
Okay.
And they have tentatively accepted that timing, which in itself was a big savings because they would have expected a raise retroactive to July 1st of 2024.
Right.
And it's not an outcome that we worked towards, but it became an outcome, I think, that made sense because they always wanted to be synced up with the teachers anyway. So that's why they had a 3-year contract, which begins in 25, which begins in July 1st of 25, and they have tentatively agreed.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions on the contract?
I have one question.
Good, Doctor.
Did anybody work with this group of employees around whether or not this was a good decision or not for them? Was there any conversations with the trustees of the agricultural school about pros and cons of this or anything? Or anybody in administration? Was there a conversation with them?
Well, the laws in Massachusetts, there's no way for me to discuss whether you want to form a union or not.
But a lot of times administration just talks to people about the decisions they're making.
John Martin was involved with our lawyers about what we could or couldn't say. I was told I cannot have a discussion about the appropriateness,
right,
intelligence, good idea.
Right. You can't do that. But I just wondered if there was any conversation at all.
Not to my knowledge, no. But I thought that we were prohibited from having that conversation. That was my understanding through our lawyer and through John Martin. Is that
there's certain things that you definitely can't say. That's true.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
I think if I'm hearing you right, Beth, I think we're talking not in an official
Yeah, just
conversation,
was there any
hey,
conversation?
have you guys thought about both sides of this? Not trying to talk them into or out of anything. I
Yeah.
think we're just trying to figure out if there was any other conversation, but
Yeah, exactly. I was just
but-
curious.
okay. All right, and you said you're going to address the sped surcharge when we get to the next section, correct?
Yeah, we can talk about it anytime you want to, but it probably makes more sense to have some numbers in front of us when we
Yep.
talk about it.
Okay, and the only other question I have is revolving around capital. You did mention that there's about a $2 million surplus, is that correct?
Yeah, that was again at the beginning of this year. We had a $2 million surplus. I can look it up in my booklet here from last year. When we started the year, we had almost exactly $2 million surplus.
Okay, I just seem to remember in a previous meeting, there was a mention of $4 million somewhere. I might be mixing that up with the registry issues, so forgive me if I have that wrong, but I thought the number was higher on the Aggie than 2 million.
No, historically, and I can go back 24 years, the high watermark for the Aggies surplus was 2014 before the construction project, and that was less than $4 million, $3.7 million.
Okay.
Until a few years ago was as low as $400,000 or $200,000. We've been building it up over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the next section and start talking some numbers. And I promise we'll try to keep this to only another half hour, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again, and I'll pick the financial presentation instead. You guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, so for cover page, not the most informational page, but basically you see that down here we have a surplus of $192,000. Well, that's very modest. That's 1% of our total revenue. So it's not I consider this to be a break-even budget. I don't consider this to be a budget that actually generates a surplus of any meaning to the school. So this is sort of a break-even budget. Gross expenses and gross revenue versus prior year, we'll see on the next page. And you see down here that we are currently suggesting a $555,000 capital spending, which would come out of our reserves, Eric. So that would come out of the $2 million I just addressed.
Okay.
So that would actually obviously use our surplus rather than contribute to our surplus as a result of FY26. This was the same situation we were in FY25. Now, how each of those two numbers will work out in FY25, we don't know yet because it's too early. But I do believe we'll generate a surplus in FY25. I'm not sure how much of that we will then spend on our capital projects. We had 600,000 something budgeted in capital in FY25.
Okay, that was going to be my question. One other question about these numbers is that does this make any assumptions on that new contract?
Yes, there's
as far as salaries.
Yeah, there's an assumption, a cost of living assumption for both groups that are built into these numbers.
Okay.
Our best guess of where we're going to end up. Not conservatives per se, but our best guess at where we're going to end up as a result of these negotiations.
Okay. Let me just
Is that in the salary reserve, or is that built into the line item for the teachers and how is that set up in the expense list?
It's built into the teachers and staff salaries. So it's already in the detail of those lines. It's not, the salary reserve is for severance. That's a severance line we have every year. That's for people when they leave, what we might owe them when they leave the school. Not severance isn't the right way. When people leave the school, if we owe them, vacation, if we owe them sick time, whatever we owe them, that's what that line's for. It's built into those numbers above. The potential raise, if whatever you want to call it, the cost of living adjustments built into those numbers above.
Okay.
The next page, maybe a little bit more informative, is the comparative page of this year's expenses and revenues versus last year's expenses and revenues, or budgeted, in both cases budgeted. So you see we have a 3.3% increase in revenue. It's about $600,000. And then if you see down in expenses, it's about $600,000 of increased expenses. And in the end, it's pretty much of a wash between last year's planned surplus, modest, and this year's modest planned surplus. They're basically the same number. If you look at the detail, we have $600,000 of increased spending in FY26, but that's $400,000 in increased salary expense and $200,000 in increased indirect costs. So there's the controllable, most controllable portion, which is the contractual supplies, obligations, and equipment, has no increase at all. So there's no increase in that expense at all. So 100% of this is either salaries for existing people or indirect costs, again, personnel related, that's mostly driven by retirement and healthcare. Those are the two biggest components of our indirect costs, is retirement costs and healthcare costs, which we don't have direct control over other than number of employees and what we pay them would affect our allocation or direct costs in those areas. So that's where we are. There's nothing too exciting in here, I don't think. But it just shows you that we're almost presenting the same budget we presented last year with a little bit of tuition growth, a little bit of expense growth.
John, has there been any conversation regarding the, I know a lot of the town, like I know in our town, there's a lot of conversation right now about federal grants because of what's the current administration is looking at, where the potential of losing some grant money or freezing grant money. Did you guys have any conversation revolving around that? How much of your revenue do you depend on? Is that the other line that you have listed?
Yeah, it goes into the other line, but if you looked at the detail, we don't budget a lot of, we have $200,000 of grant reimbursement right there. So that would be for people who are in our payroll who are paid for by grants. Other than that, we're doing discretionary spending based on grants. So we could adjust ourselves pretty easily if we decide we're not going to get the grant money. Right now, we've heard of only one small grant that was nutrition related that wasn't going to be funded by the federal government, but we only expected to get $2,000 or $3,000 worth of benefit from that grant anyway. Implicitly, we're planning on continuing to get our grants, but there aren't millions of dollars involved in our grants. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the ones we get, which is Title I, the special education grants, those are pretty solid. Those are pretty solid grants that are unlikely to be affected. But the short answer is we haven't made allowance for getting significantly different federal money than we have historically gotten in recent history.
And those grants you just mentioned, like Title I, that's in the other line as well, because that's not broken out into separate.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. All right. So just a quick touch on enrollment here, because I find that's always pretty interesting for people. So there's that's this year's enrollment, February 28th of 25, 260 in-county kids, 332 out-of-county kids. There are 81 communities that the school is serving right now. That's even a higher number than when I came a couple of years ago. 26 out of the 28 Norfolk County send us students. 2 of them don't. Brookline is one of them. We currently have 55 out-of-county communities, and of those 55, 35 of them send us 5 students or less. That's turned out to be pretty significant to me. I didn't understand that when I took the job, but I understand the significance of it. We're always relatively insignificant to every one of these towns, and I think that benefits us, because if we increase our tuition, it's still relatively insignificant because so many of these towns are sending us from 1 to 5 kids. And so there's always a second vocational school, of course, in every town that sends us students. There's always a second vocational school, the traditional vocational school, that they're also sending kids to. And in almost every case, they're sending 10 times as many kids to the vocational school as they're sending to the Aggie. So the Aggie always becomes the third thing to discuss about when you talk about the school budget, because first you talk about the in-town school, and then you talk about the vocational school, and then eventually you get to talk about the Aggie and what you're going to spend at the Aggie. So I do think that works in our benefit, and I do like to show this to people just so they understand the scope of the school and how many communities we affect, and we have to coordinate with. So all these guys we have to bill, obviously. So we bill all of these people independently based exactly on the number of students that there are in the school at the measurement point of the year, which is October 1st.
Just one thing I would highlight on what you just said is kind of interesting, that looking at that list is that from the in-county, between me, Barbara, and Beth, we only have 2 students in our
Right.
3 communities. So we're in that population, but obviously we do care, whether it's 1 student or 20 students, that's part of our job. So, it is interesting that occurs.
I was actually surprised there was even one from Wellesley, because I think historically we haven't sent anybody. So I'm glad to see at least there's one. So,
Yeah, I mean, there's some communities that in the county that really have both a history and different reasons for sending students, right? It's
Mhm.
sometimes it depends on the career paths, and other times it depends on other factors, and some of those other factors don't exist in Wellesley and Needham and Brookline that are the reasons that some kids get sent to us or excited about an education at the Aggie as opposed to their own
Yep.
district.
Okay.
All right, so this big page for you guys is the tuition calculation, right? And the
Yeah.
first thing I want to point out is our estimate of in and out of county students, because it is relevant in the tuition calculation for the in-county cities and towns, and it's a little hard for the average person or even maybe advisory board member to understand, which is the more kids we get from in-county, the more expensive in-county tuition is going to be,
Mhm.
right? Because in-county tuition is a product of how much we get from out of county, how much we have to spend to educate those kids, and the difference is going to be made up by us setting a tuition for in-county that's significantly less than out of county, but is designed to give us at least a modest surplus so that we can provide the education we need and also provide for the future. So if you see here, 275 Norfolk County kids, 321 out of Norfolk County kids. Last year's budget was 258 Norfolk County kids and 336 out of county kids. So it has been changing every one of the 4 years of students that we have this year has become increasingly focused on in-county. So I'll give you the percentages. Seniors this year are 40% in-county. Juniors are 42% in-county. Sophomores are 46% in-county. Freshmen are 48% in-county. So there is a trend that's been in place since I've been here of more and more in-county students getting accepted and matriculating at the Aggie. So we are assuming that trend is going to continue, but we don't know if it reaches a maximum at some point and just levels off.
Okay.
Paul, did you ask a question? Okay, so I'm assuming Paul either will ask a question later or didn't ask a question. So that's the first question. The other thing to remember is we have 596 kids. We're not equipped to have any more than that. So there's no more growth in the student population, right? Unless we change at least one of our buildings, we cannot really accept any more students than the 600 we have. When I came here, the number was around 580 students or 584 students. We made a conscious effort to admit more kids as freshmen. We made a conscious effort to backfill freshmen when they left. We made a conscious effort to backfill sophomores. So that over the course of the years that I've been here, have now pushed the number of students up to just shy of 600. But there is no more student growth in our future unless we have some sort of structural change in our buildings, because right now we feel like this is the most students we can have on campus. So the rest of the calculation is the same way we've done it every year. I just want to draw your attention to this line right here, which is in-county special education. So for the first year, we're going to charge $3,883 for in-county special education students. If you send us a student that requires special education, and that's a nice bright line. Everybody knows whether someone's a special education student or not. It has to do with their classification with the state, has to do with individual education plans that they've been given. So there's no dispute about who's a special education student and who isn't. We're going to charge $6,883 for that. Now, that's not the full cost of special education. The full cost of special education per student this year is $7,765. When we introduced this concept, John Martin felt strongly that we should bring it on gradually. So instead of charging the full cost of special education, we're charging 50% of the cost of special education in year one. It's our intention to charge 75% of special education costs in year two, not approved, not even proposed yet to the board. That would be next year. And then in year three, get up to a full cost of special education, which right now is about $8,000. So very significant per student and very significant relative to the in-county tuition cost. Now, the effect of that for us, if you go over here, you'll see that in-county special education is expected to contribute to $267,000 to our bottom line. So if you can recall that our bottom line only showed $100,000 or less than $200,000 of a surplus, the entire surplus is basically funded or related to this increase in tuition that relates to special education students. So we would have no surplus if it wasn't for the decision to make this change. And John and I did give a lot of thought to various ways where we could improve the financial position of the school. And this is where we ended up. I think our expense control is pretty good, but that's for you guys to have your opinions about. But this is where we ended up. I just want to be explicit about that. Have I gotten feedback? I've gotten a little bit of feedback. When we issue our tuition bills, when we issue our tuition rates, we typically don't get a lot of feedback right away, but I probably did hear from 4 or 5 cities and towns, Jim Johnson being one of them. But mostly the feedback was about the calculation. How many special education students do we have? Is this in addition to the $5,000 basic tuition? And I had to just explain the mechanism because it was new to in-county cities and towns. I wouldn't say I got any feedback that was directly negative about it. It was more structural, calculation questions.
So is the 3,000 up and above?
Say that again, Eric, please.
So is the 3,000 up and above the 5,000?
Yes, 5,000 is the basic tuition. This is the way we've been doing it for the last few years out of county cities and towns.
Right. Okay.
Basic tuition. Then if you have a special education student, you pay what's a surcharge for special education. The one thing I didn't mention, and I should have, basic tuition has gone from about 4,500 to about 5,000, which is an 11% increase. It's not a huge dollar increase, but it is a percentage. It is a big percentage increase. And again, that's us trying to generate a modest surplus at the school. This is the last number that we calculate, which is what do we want in-county tuition to be? And this is part of this is basically supported by everything we get from the state. It's supported by everything we get from the county. It's supported by the grants. It's supported by all of our various revenue sources. That's what keeps this number as low as it is. But it is an 11% increase over the prior year. The prior 2 years, we had very modest increases in this, in the 5%, 2%, something like that, increase. But this year is the first time in a few years that the base salary increased a decent amount. Again, as a percentage, in absolute dollars, it's still modest. It's a $500 increase.
John, when is enrollment locked in?
What do you mean by locked in, Eric?
Like based on your numbers, your numbers are assuming a certain number from each community. So the reason I'm asking is because when the governor's budget and when the state budget comes out, special education is included as part of the Chapter 70 calculation, as far as on the revenue side. So how does the state know? Is it based on prior year enrollment, or like if we all of a sudden get 5 extra sped students in this year, how is that reflected in your revenue side?
Well, you mean we, the school?
Yes.
I don't think
special education is funded through Chapter 70.
Yeah, but it's not based on actual students that require special education. It's a assumption and a percentage that's added based on the number of students you have. Special education in Massachusetts, I don't believe it's funded based on actual number of special education students in your system. It's funded based on a rate, a surplus that is assumed and is added to everybody's funding based on an assumed special education surplus. That's my understanding, Eric. We do report, obviously, our special education students to the state, but I don't believe that directly affects our Chapter 70.
Okay. All right. Any other questions from Finance Committee?
Yeah. John, are you guys preparing for any changes in this enrollment projection that might happen because of the pending state legislation?
No. This is what we would do if nothing was happening with the state. It's the biggest part of the state. We'll get the number of students we're planning on getting no matter what happens, right? So the important thing about enrollment would be two things. One, how much does it affect in and out of county students, right? How much would it change to, let's say, pure lottery would affect in and out of county students? As I think I've said before, but maybe it was to my own trustees, our applications are pretty much 50-50 in and out of county. So I don't think that would change the gross number of in and out of county students that we would get if it switched to a lottery, because we don't favor in county or out of county, and neither one gets accepted at a disproportionate rate based on our current system. But there are two other elements to it. One, would the school be more expensive? Would it be more expensive to run if our quality of student was different than the ones that we're hopefully getting from a process that gets what I could just say is appropriate students into the school, trying to get students that we think would thrive here. Obviously, with a lottery, you don't control that anymore. You control only applicants. How do you get people to apply to the school? That's the only control you'd have on a pure lottery. So that could be, Elizabeth, that could be a problem, is that it could become more expensive to educate a group of kids who maybe aren't as appropriate, again, as the kids we would have picked. The last one is really would really be a big change, which is the concept of favoring your local district over out of district kids. So that's also part of it. And we're not sure, and we are not sure whether we're going to be subject to that as well. So if we were subject to that, that would mean that we couldn't take any outside of Norfolk County students until we'd accepted every Norfolk County student that applied and quote unquote qualified, because there are some qualifications that you are allowed to apply based on the recommendation that was made by the Secretary, I think it is of Education, just last weekend, just the end of last week. So it's all really new, Elizabeth, but there is a thing in there. There is a part of it that in the original proposal that said you were supposed to favor and strictly accept everybody in county before you took anybody from your sending district before you took anybody outside of your sending district. That would, of course, have huge consequences to the school.
So what will you do if that happens?
Well, this will not affect, nothing that we're talking about now would affect this year's student population. It would affect next year's student population. And it would be tuition methodology in place in FY26 to affect FY27 students. So when we would know what the process was, because it's supposed to be implemented, I think, by November of 2025 this year.
Right.
So we would know by the time we budgeted what no longer be subsidized by out-of-county cities and towns, and we would have to charge at a significantly higher rate to in-county students.
Well, or what steps are you taking now to control costs to prepare for the possibility that this mix changes?
Well, John and Robin and I did meet, and we did go through various money-saving options before we put this budget together. Decided not to do anything right now that would involve saving at least $100,000. That was our standard, is how could we save $100,000? So I guess we dust off that and more, Elizabeth, if it came to that. I mean, I guess it's never easy. It's never going to be easy in a school to save significant money. It would obviously be headcount. Obviously, you'd be getting rid of people. There's really no way to save significant amounts of money unless you figured out a way to deliver the education with less staff members without less students, right? So we have to keep the students at 600, but we'd have to figure out a way to serve them with less people. I don't think resources figure into it too much, but I guess there'd be some amount of transportation resources, maybe even less animals. We'd have to figure out how to do that. So we've given it some preliminary thought, but yeah, that's fair question, is both of those things would have to come into play if we really went to Norfolk County only students, both cost reduction and salary, new tuition.
And how much has the budget gone up, percentage wise each year over the last 5 years, John? What have we been talking about in terms of growth?
I mean, this year's is only 3%. You're talking about the expenses, I'm sure. I think we've been in that 3 to 5% every year. I don't think we have any really big years of expense growth. I mean, I don't have it in front of me. I have last year's number. I don't know if anybody remembers last year's number, but looks like it went up. Oh, well, last year has 7% in here. I don't know if that's where we ended up, but I think we might have ended up at 7%. I don't recall all of the things that went into that. If there was one-time things that went into that. But I think prior years don't have that big of an increase. I think last year was a little bit of an outlier because we did move things from capital into operating. We moved stuff from grants into operating because what we inherited here had used grants kind of liberally and had done some things that we weren't comfortable with doing going forward. So we had made some changes, but that's a long way of saying I'm not sure, Elizabeth. And that would be, obviously something that we could put together. And
That might be good to present as the whole picture, a bigger picture for people. I mean, I
Okay.
think it's really important in these contract negotiations to realize that the landscape due to the state budget, the state law could be really different. And, it's great to be in unions, but privatization is an issue, is a potential way of saving money. So I just think, there are situations where people think that there's no question that once they're in the union, everything's gonna move forward, but privatization is often the way institutions have to deal with that problem. And privatization and automation,
Yeah.
technological, and I think it's really important to be realistic and clear-eyed about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that will be part of our negotiation with teachers, that this is unsettled and we don't have any restrictions on reducing staff. That's not part of our contract with our teachers or with our
Right.
support staff.
That's exactly right. So that's really important to remember that when your back's against the wall, if we have to take almost 100% of our people from Norfolk County, our back's going to be against the wall financially.
Mhm.
You
Yes.
make the decisions you got to make.
Yes. And I think we have the flexibility, but it's a good point that we could work that. Well, explain to the union that that's something that they ought to be thinking about as well as us.
Yeah,
Not
exactly.
just our.
They should be
Sure.
thinking about that. Because
Okay.
I think we don't know what's going to happen here, but we have to plan for that contingency, John. I mean, we can't go into this on a wing and a prayer and hope that everything's going to work out just great. We got to have a plan.
Right, but that would be FY27. That wouldn't be
It
FY.
would be, but if we set ourselves up badly in FY26, it'll make the problem bigger to solve. We want to be in FY26. We want to be as ready as possible to make the FY27 problem less of a problem.
Yeah, I think, well, the only way, I mean, the best way to, set ourselves up would be to control our personnel, which we haven't added anybody, and
Yep.
to control the, cost of living, which we're
Exactly.
working on,
Exactly. I mean,
I mean, we
yeah.
haven't exchanged numbers yet for teachers, but we have begun to exchange numbers for the support staff. They've
Yeah.
given us a 1-year number. We've given them a 3-year number. They owe us a 3-year number.
John, in this new contract, I know I keep going back to that, but it's an unknown, and the unknown kind of scares me a little bit. Are we looking at any requests? I mean, I know under normal circumstances with contracts, as you know, you would have a number like 2%, 3% for salary increase. Is there any talk that anybody's looking for a bump in the job they're in under negotiation prior to any 2 or 3% increase? Like, is there a particular group of people, let's say, that feel like they're being underpaid anyway? They
Sure.
want to bump up in the contract, and then they're going to get a 2 or 3% above that.
Yep. Truth is, we didn't get our support people relative
Yeah.
to the market. And that's something that John and I have worked on since I've been here. We've actually regraded down multiple jobs once they've become available and we've had to go into the market to get somebody. We've graded down, we've reduced the grades on, I would say, at least 4 jobs or 5 jobs since every time we have an opening, we reconsider, is this the grade we want to keep for this thing? And we have gone down in, like I said, a handful of jobs. Every time we have an opportunity, we consider that.
Okay.
I don't expect the union's going to come back with us in that area. I don't expect that.
All right.
I
Paul,
have
you
one
have
more,
something?
I have
Oh,
one
I'm
more
sorry.
question, Eric.
Go
if I
ahead,
can.
Liz. I'm sorry.
So the other issue is the MTA's strategy clearly is to have teachers strike and to have teachers be authorized and able to strike. Is there any concern that in the negotiations our teachers would strike as part of the new MTA strategy?
Haven't discussed that with anybody, Elizabeth. I mean, we have AFT, so they have been less. They have presented themselves as less aggressive and less, they haven't been as explicit as wanting to argue for that as the MTA has. But
Right.
to be honest with you, we have not discussed anything about that.
Okay.
About striking.
There's been no rattling of.
No. There's no been saber rattling or anything like that. No, there's never been a mention of.
Okay.
We've had a very positive work relationship with our teachers union. We sometimes talk about grievances, and then we stop and the union guy goes, "Oh, but you guys haven't had a grievance from a teacher in years, right?" And we say, "Yeah, that's true. We haven't had any grievances." So we do have a very good environment right now.
Okay, that's good. Mm-hmm.
Any other tuition questions? Because all we have left is capital, and that's sort of straightforward, and it's good and bad.
Yeah, I have a tuition question. I wondered about the, do you think that this very small but clear downward trend of out of county people has anything to do with the increase in the tuition? You think there's any relationship between that, John?
I want to say no, because I have no feedback, anecdotal. That's all I would be subject to. I think the answer is no, but then the next answer is, does it have to do with, what does it have to do with that? Then what is causing it? Because we have all the same communities and they are sending us students. So the only thing I can think of is we hired a couple years ago an admissions person who then began to do the outreach to cities and towns for students, which we had been doing versus via a stipend to an existing employee. So an existing employee said, "I'll do the admissions, outreach," and they got paid, whatever, $3,000-4,000 to do this stipended outreach. Now we have an employee whose job it is to do that outreach. But here's the tricky part. Almost all the outreach takes place in county because out of county cities and towns don't want us, and we don't have any leverage on them, even though the state law says you must allow vocational schools to have access to your students. That's not defined. So a lot of cities, school districts don't provide us with ease of access to their students. And so we have leverage in county. So in-county does generally provide us with access to their students. So we are making the best effort to get students, but that effort is 95% targeted towards in-county cities and towns. So it may be that we're sort of reaping what we're sowing here, in that we are becoming more and more familiar and popular with in-county cities and towns. That's a speculation. I don't really like speculating, but I've thought about it myself. Why are we on this trend? We have been. agnostic as to where the kids come from. I can tell you that I do not get involved in admissions in any way. I don't ever visit the admissions person during the admissions part of the year because I do not want to exert any influence over who gets accepted to the school. That's all I can say about that subject, is that we are not advocating out of county harder than in county. We're just letting the students get into the school that we feel like are the best students for the school.
Okay.
Hey, John, can I ask a question?
Sure, Paul.
It seems that the number of SPED students in the in-county is a higher percentage than the out-of-county. Is there some sort of a correlation there?
You know what, Paul? Until this year, we never cost. It costs a lot. So our in-county cities and towns sending us a little bit more or directing their special education students to the Aggie because there's no cost to sending them to the Aggie and it would save them a lot of money. There is the designation of a special education student, which really is the school district has some control over who gets determined to be special education. So how do I put this the right way? Lower income school districts can oftentimes have less special education designated students. For instance, Brockton sends us a ton of students, only one or two of which is actually designated as special education. So it could be that through the lack of advocacy of the parents or the resistance of the school department, that some of these towns really just don't have high special education percentages. The Norfolk County, which is relatively affluent, very well educated, those counties are more likely to, those towns are more likely to have higher special education populations because of the awareness, the education, the advocacy of the families in there. That's, again, anecdotal, but you're right in that we have a high percentage of special education students relative to the in-county student number. We're just starting to think about that this year because we're just starting to notice it this year, and because it's has an economic effect for us, and so we're just trying to figure out why is that? Why do we have a higher percentage? We have a city and town. We have a city or town in Norfolk County that sends us 10 students, 6 of whom are special education students. So that's a small sample size, and you don't want to reach conclusions on small sample sizes. But that's 3 times the number that you would expect to occur from one sample of 10 students. You would expect 2 of them to be special education students. We've got 6. So that might mean something and it might not. And that might change when we start charging for special education.
Well, that's why it came to my attention. Once you start charging them.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
All right. Any other questions on tuition? Go ahead, Dr. Childs.
Can I just jump one more? I just want to, John, I really wish that the Aggie would put forth some cost control plans and measures, given what you potentially would be facing in FY27. I really wish we could see some of that. I think it would be helpful. I think people would feel much more comfortable about really getting behind the budget.
When you say see it, you mean enact something and reflect it in the budget, or do you mean have it on the
Yeah,
shelf?
I do. That's exactly what I mean. See it, enact it, just get yourself ready.
We don't want to find ourselves, when I first came on the NCAB board, the Aggie was in a $500,000 structural deficit. And I know we've clawed our way out of that. We don't want, I think my concern would be, we don't want to backtrack and end up in a place that we're not ready for. And as you said, we have some reserve. One of the questions I have to build on what Dr. Childs asked is our revenue. I know revenue are generally conservative projections. I guess I would like to know what we, let's say for the last couple of years, what have we projected for revenue? And what have we actually gotten? Because I know when that's on the local level, we estimate our revenues conservatively, and then throughout the year, whether it be from state aid or from other types of revenue sources, we end up with a little bit extra, which helps us out in the surplus at the end of the year. But I'd like to see those, estimated versus actuals at some point, just to see if we're, are we running really lean, or are we under inflating our revenue by a larger percentage for one reason or another? But I think, to Dr. Child's point, I agree. I think, we just want to make sure that we're all ahead of this whole process, because we don't want to find ourselves, sitting here next year talking about the same thing, but now we have an upside down situation where now the in-county are getting hammered in tuition. I mean, I know I'm talking from a town that I only have one student that goes there, and it's not hugely significant for my town right now. It's not to say that next year we won't have 4 kids that go there. We never know year over year. So, yeah, I think we definitely need to keep that on the front burner anyway. All right.
We want to make sure that our county communities can afford to send kids to the Aggie.
Absolutely.
That's the bottom line. We want to make sure that can happen. And if your back's against the wall with a budget, that could be a very serious problem.
Yeah, and also, being sensitive to the fact that it is an aging, we've got some aging buildings and we've got some capital needs that are going to happen during, down the line. How are we addressing that? Again, similar to vocational, a lot of the member towns get charged on the capital side as well as to tuition, similar to what we do here. We don't want to have this conversation next year where we have, the in-county are getting tripled or even more so, down the road. So as long as we're all keeping it on the front burner, but I do agree with Liz. I'd like to have something showing some sort of a tangible, I guess I'll call it a plan, but I would say more of an expectation, I guess, on what if scenario, what happens if tuition or enrollment goes down by 20% on one side, how does that affect it? So I think we just need to all keep in mind about that. But any other questions on tuition? All right, so let's move on to the last piece, which is the capital, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, so the last page just details both what we are planning on spending on capital, $555,000. We're limiting ourselves to just a couple of projects, bigger projects, not small projects. We're just focusing on the big ones for now. Passenger van, campus lighting, admin building roof repairs, which fall into the building envelope, get some savings in fuel costs, hopefully. And then some unit replacements for rooftop units, which are due to and getting to the end of their useful lives and cost $100,000 a piece. And but the left-hand column, which needs to be updated, will be updated before our board meeting, is, all of the things we have to do that we'd like to spend money on, excluding 2 whole buildings that we are considering replacing, which is the cafeteria and the livestock barn. Those aren't even on the list here because we can't even figure out the number that would be necessary. So these are all the things that are at least conceivable and doable, with the maximum of $2 million for the plant science building's roof, which is not entirely intact and it gets repaired every year, but needs to ultimately be replaced. That's our biggest nut that we have to crack. But that we've been encouraged to put that left-hand column out there to show all of the capital needs that are the known capital needs, infrastructure needs of the school. So we are doing that. As we did that last year's budget, we're planning on doing that in this year's budget for the trustees, maybe going even further and sort of prioritizing those things to figure out when we would want to address those things. But right now, there's no funding for that, right? There's no ability to borrow. There's no reserve that could cover that. And the surpluses we're generating are too small to, affect our ability to pay for those. So we're a little bit stuck, or a lot of it stuck in the capital area. We're not in very good shape in the capital area. We need to get more creative on how we might solve some of these capital needs. Okay. And that's why we're trying to do some fundraising. We're going to do a small scale fundraising to think, is there an appetite out there for us to raise millions of dollars, to address some of these needs from alumni? We're going to do a smaller project this year, maybe a $250,000 project, just to put training wheels on and say, look, if we ask people for money, how would we do in getting it? We're going to take a discrete project and try to do that this year.
Okay.
John, I think your comment about putting some potential dates on these would be helpful for everybody. So we know that, and I'm just making this up because I don't have any idea. The administration building window repairs are really scheduled for, 2030, type of thing. And so you could see kind of what are the more immediate needs, and which would then be helpful for both the the advisory board and the trustees and everyone, but also it will help your fundraising. You can say, we've got some certain needs that are short term and some that are longer, and we're fundraising for whichever one you decide.
Yeah.
But I think that time frame would give everybody more, give us more information, but it also would help us in the long-term planning.
I think
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna endeavor to do that before the trustees meeting, but at least I could be pretty comfortable we can do it before the.
Yeah,
Advisory board.
dates probably work into the same thing, but what I was going to suggest is a list of almost like give it a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 priority
Yeah,
list. And what is the top priorities? What are the bottom priorities? What are things that might be able to wait, like to Barbara's point, wait 2 years, 3 years, but but others that need to be done as soon as possible. And this way we can help you, when we get into budget season, we can certainly help you try to figure out what the best way to fund these sources are, not overstepping, obviously. All right, any other questions on the capital side? Go ahead, Doctor.
John, how much of your surplus are you intending to transfer into your capital improvement fund?
well, we would transfer as much as we needed it. We would transfer it over. The trustees have already approved the concept of us transferring. If we talk about 25, the $600,000 that we needed to spend, we don't have. I have to look at the breakdown between the two funds. Yeah, most of it is not in capital. Most of it is in our general fund. So we had gotten approval from the trustees to transfer over the money needed for the capital projects from the general fund to the capital fund.
So, okay, so let me ask a quick question. How much is in the general fund right now and how much is in the capital fund that combined would be considered sort of capital money?
$2 million, but
2 million total.
almost all of it is in operating. 1.9 is in operating and $100,000 is in capital left over from previous transfers and previous uses.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we're talking about two accounts. I wanted to make sure we weren't talking about 2 million in each account or whatever the situation was.
2 million
Okay.
total.
Okay.
Could I just weigh in for a quick second, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Sure.
Just for the table's benefit, as John speaks about capital, when I speak the same language, the word capital has a lot of different uses. You've got surplus money, you get bonded capital, anything spent on a fixed asset is called capital. I understand the schools use surplus dollars for operational purposes as well as capital purposes. The county treasurer informed me some time ago, and I think this was before John Wallace joined the schools, that they had established a capital fund similar to what the county uses. It's a separate fund into which dollars are deposited for the intended use of large-scale capital projects. Once the money's in there, it's used for capital purposes. So I just wanted to explain that you all are talking about a school budget where John is giving you an explanation of surplus funds, some of which go in the operational directions, some of which are spent on capital. But there's also a capital fund at the county level that's tracked by the treasurer that is used for only capital purposes. Those dollars, once they get in there, can accumulate and roll forward and be used eventually if they gain enough funding for large scale capital projects. So I just want to add that dimension to what y'all are talking about. And currently, by the way, if anyone is wanting to know, let me just open up the trial balance, John. According to the treasurer, there's an Aggie Capital Improvement Fund that's got $546 in it. So
Is it $546?
but it's a fund. It's already created, and
Oh,
there has been no monies recently deposited into it for long-term capital projects Because again, the schools are using their surplus funds for these modest capital projects. There does not appear to be any funding set aside for long-term larger projects.
Okay.
But I thought that the school could do, I think I'm hearing you saying, yes, that's true, John. I thought the school could do the same thing that we do on the non-school county side, which is to put money that's left over in our capital improvement fund. So it's there so you're working towards that $4 million nut that you're looking at in terms of total capital projects. So I guess my question really is, I didn't thanks, John, for explaining that, because I was really asking, in my question, I meant to ask John, how much money are you taking from your surplus and putting in the capital improvement fund? Not
Yeah,
the
we have
just
no,
for capital projects.
we don't have any practice of doing that. It just sits in operating until we need it, and then we move it over just as it needed. We're basically funding our capital projects just year over year. We haven't funded them in the past because we've been getting money from the county for the last couple of years, but beginning this year, we didn't get any money from the county, so we're funding our capital ourselves, our
But
capital.
wouldn't that be a good idea to start to put some money in there every year from your surplus so that you gradually are able to do that $4 million list? That plant science-based roof is 2 million. I mean, you could have 2 million in there if you put in 500,000, over the next 3 years.
Yeah, we could do it. I mean, that would be, since we basically have equal access to both pools, it doesn't really achieve anything other than maybe something more symbolic, maybe a more form over function, but I don't think it's particularly meaningful for me to transfer it from one account to the other, but we could do it.
Well, the
It's
reason we
not-
do it the reason we do it for the non-school side is because then that money is protected money available just for capital, and we're not using it for plugging any operational holes or other stuff. And we're still doing money for maintenance too, but it gives you more freedom, and it gives you more security, because then you can actually make real choices. If you have some money in there, you could make real choices about that capital list. If you don't have anything in there, you're depending on some surplus. But if you actually start to even build it a little bit, I mean, it's like what we teach our kids, right? Even if it's $10 a month, you start your you put it in there for the long-term big thing you got to buy. And I mean, I just don't understand why we wouldn't do something every year. I mean, it seems to me like that would be a great budget improvement, would be to say, look, we really want to commit to putting something in there.
Operating. We're not running operating deficits, so we're not using any of that money. We're not using any money other than capital purchases. That's the only use of our surplus since I've been here. If we've used it at all, it's only been on capital. We do not run a deficit. We haven't run a deficit since I've been here. And so we've never dipped into it, but maybe symbolically, maybe
Well, I would call it
I don't know.
more
Maybe
for-
there are reasons to do it, but I'm just saying, practically, it will not have any effect on our
I would say for transparency purposes, I mean, showing an amount of money that's listed as capital, as far as, for the purposes of the full county board of the NCAB, having that number to know X amount of dollars is earmarked, if you will, for capital projects and not just sitting in the general fund, because that gives people a little bit I guess, a sense of security that there's money put aside to do these things. Whereas money that's sitting in the general fund, I understand what you're saying, John, is that, but if it's general fund money, legally it can be used for anything. It doesn't have to be capital. We put it into a capital stabilization of some kind or a capital specific fund, then the transparency is there that this money is for capital, period. So it just gives everybody, I think, a warm, fuzzy feeling, to have it labeled correctly.
It also is a commitment. It's demonstrated commitment. It's just saying, well, we'll pay for it when we have the money. It's saying we are committed to it's a policy statement of the school. We are committed to fixing our capital problems. And I mean, I think it's much more than a symbol. I think it really is a commitment. And I think the other thing for us at the NCAB, we have to pass our capital stuff with a 2/3 vote. if we take it out of our capital improvement plan. And I don't know if that's the same rules at the trustee level for the Aggie or not, but it is at the NCAB. I mean, it also forces the issue of this is so important that we want 2/3 of our communities to support this effort. So that's another thing, John. I don't know. I think that would be a
Yeah.
budget potential budget improvement.
I mean, the 2/3 vote is basically because it's a stabilization account.
Yeah.
You know, so the question is on the school side, is the capital account
I don't
set
know.
up as a stabilization account? If so, then yes, it would need 2/3 of
The capital account. So I'll talk to him about the significance of it being in one or the other, but I'm certainly not opposed to this.
Yeah.
It's not our intention.
Yeah.
We're adequately being supported by our cities and towns to prevent us from having to do that. And that's really the big change, which Elizabeth pointed out last meeting that we had when we were approving last budget, is the whole financial change of this school has come about because of increased tuition, not because of reduced expenses. That's the reality of the change. Elizabeth pointed that out. She was correct. And this year's budget is more tuition increase, right? So that is really what we've done, if we want to take credit for it. But the expense reduction work is a lot harder. That is a lot harder work.
Yeah.
And we dipped our toe in that water earlier, and it was pretty illuminating how hard it is going to be to reduce expenses in any meaningful way. You know, that's going to take real creativity on our part, and we'll have a new superintendent to, go down that path with in a few months, hopefully. But she made a good point, and that point continues to be made. If you want to make it again, this is still true. Is we're not reducing expenses. Not that I know of too many school districts that are reducing their expenses, but perhaps there's an opportunity to do that.
Okay.
I've said this too many times already today, but I just think if our backs are against the wall, if the state legislature passes a law that really impacts us, boy, I'd rather be doing a little bit of it this year than all of it next year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
I hear that.
All right. Just wrapping up, any final questions, any final thoughts anybody wants to say? John, does you have anything to add?
No, I appreciate your initiative here, Eric, because I think it is smart for us to try to get ahead of understanding each other. You guys giving me feedback, you understanding the budget at a deeper level, maybe than without me, just looking at it as part of the county budget. So I think this is a good initiative on your part.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right. If we don't have any other questions for right now, I mean, I will say that we will be meeting as a finance committee prior to the next county meeting. We can discuss any follow-ups to this if we have any, or if anybody has any further questions to follow up. If you want to email them to me individually, I'll send them on to John and I can get answers back. Other than that, I'll take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Right. We are. I don't think do we have to take a roll call vote, Bill?
Yes.
All right, so we'll take a roll call vote. Dr. Childs,
Yes.
Ms. Seal,
Yes.
Mr. Connors,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. All right, thank you all. Paul, my mother says to say hi.
Thank you, guys.
Back at her.
All right, thank
Thanks,
you all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, John Cronin.